Hello and welcome to the latest of Assurance and Accountability session with myself, John Campion, the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. I will let my colleagues introduce themselves and then I'll outline what we're going to be doing in this session.
Hello, I'm Mark Bayliss. I'm the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for West Mercia.
My name is Alex Murray and I'm the Temporary Chief Constable.
Hello, I'm Richard Cooper. I'm the Temporary Deputy Chief Constable.
So one of my central duties as Commissioner is to hold the Chief Constable of West Mercia Police to account for the service that is delivered to our communities across West Mercia, and as part of that to highlight and identify concerns of the residents, but also issues around, say, rising crime and indeed understanding the police's response to them. One of those significant issues, both locally and nationally, is around retail crime. We've seen large increases in some of the crime types, in stark contrast to overall crime, overall total recorded crime, which has seen a reduction. As Commissioner, I hear regularly from communities and from businesses around the impact that retail crime has, not only on the staff working in that sector, but also in the ability to be able to make money, i.e. a thriving economy. We asked our public as to what questions they would want to put, and we've had a significant number sent in, and they will feed the session that we will run today. How the session will work, it will be a more conversational style of areas to be identified, an opportunity for Alex and Richard to respond, and for the viewers at home to be able to see that process, but also to understand some of the key important information about the challenges that face West Mercia Police, the areas where still progress needs to be made, but also the successes that the police have had in tackling crime in our community. So the first part of today will be particularly around shoplifting, and that's where the majority of the questions that we had sent in focused on. Alex, I didn't know whether it was an opportunity just very briefly for you to set out what you see as your assessment of shoplifting across West Mercia in terms of the threat that it is and the crime picture across West Mercia.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, first let's talk about shoplifting, because people have different views on it. I personally think it's really serious. It affects businesses, it affects costs, and I have a view in relation to why shoplifting is going up. And I say it's going up because it has gone up in West Mercia. It's gone up very significantly in the last year. And when we compare it against total recorded crime, which is down nearly 10%, we've seen a significant increase, up to 44% increase across West Mercia in shoplifting. So this is a big area of concern for me as Chief Constable. I'll never rest on my laurels. We do have a higher detection rate than other forces though, at around 26%. So 26% of reported shoplifting, we bring an offender to justice, and that varies, and I'd say in the last 6 months that's gone up much more, but 26% year to date, that's not enough. Shoplifting is a crime we can largely solve. There's good CCTV and there's more we need to do, and I'm currently with my deputy leading the organisation in trying to improve that, which of course has a preventative effect as well.
Understanding those that are causing shoplifting, and I recognise that all offenders are not identical, and lots of them have different reasons why they offend, or indeed styles in which they offend. But do you think West Mercia Police have a good understanding of who is causing the vast majority of shoplifting across our force area?
No, I think we could always do with a richer picture, and I see quite a lot of commentary on shoplifting, and some of our staff here and perhaps some of the people watching will have a view. I find it incredibly instructive to look at the people we arrest for shoplifting and see what their motivation is. And when I was leading a performance meeting for this year, last year in 2023, I asked people what would their view be on why people are motivated, and of course there's several reasons, cost of living crisis being one that is often offered. When we look at, for example, at that time we looked at, okay, let's look at the last 20 shoplifters we'd arrested, and between the 20 of them had over 600 previous criminal convictions. It's clear to me that whilst there may be individuals every now and then who shoplift because of cost of living crisis, the greatest problem here in West Mercia, and I think across the country as shoplifting has gone up, is people who do this as a lifestyle choice, often organised, and they use it to pay for drugs, to pay for other things, and they are prolific criminals, prolific shoplifters.
One of the questions we had in was from Steve around their understanding that the majority of retail crime is by organised crime groups. Is this the reality? And so we're hearing that there is a link that you just talked about, Alex, but how does the force get a good understanding as to what might be seen as a fairly low-level crime of some meat or some cheese being stolen in the local shop through to that wider link to organised criminality?
Yeah, well perhaps I don't want to create a misunderstanding. So there's organised criminality, for example, where you'd have some groups from all over the world and all over the UK, often sometimes Eastern European, who will travel around the country committing theft in a very organised way. We've seen that, for example, with some Eastern European groups currently operating against Argos stores that we've managed to arrest, and they were responsible for thefts across the place. I also think there's organised crime groups locally where people keep a watch out, and the drug markets are supplied that way. But I also think a particular problem in West Mercia is individuals, often drug addicts, drug users, who are not organised but are prolific and have multiple offences for many different crime types, and who will just go into Tesco's, Asda, Matalan, and just clear out, for example, all the steaks, all the meats, all the laundry detergent, which is an increasing trend, and then be able to, on the second-hand market or straight to drug dealers, be able to exchange those goods either for money or drugs.
So earlier you said that there's a good assessment around understanding the causes of shoplifting, i.e. that threat assessment, that intelligence, maybe landscape. How would you improve it, or what plans have you got in West Mercia Police to improve the understanding that threat shoplifting is, and indeed the profiles of those that are causing it?
Well, the first thing is for Richard and I to make it clear to our organisation and our leaders and our staff that shoplifting is important, and people who suffer from shoplifting should expect a good service from us, and we can no doubt move on to that, because sometimes we haven't offered that service, and we should have done. So we then create a performance culture where we look at each local policing area and we say, how are you doing for reported shoplifting? We examine variations, why are some people doing particularly well, why aren't some people doing particularly well. But our number one method, if you like, is to put the oil where the squeak is. So where we have a prolific offender, we understand who they are, and we run an operation or have a problem-solving plan on that particular offender. Now, to be as preventative as possible, we might want to create civil injunctions that prevent them going to particular shops. And those problem-solving plans can be on an offender, or they could be on a premises. And in each of the local policing areas, there will be problem-solving meetings where they say, okay, what are we doing with this prolific offender, or what are we doing with this particular location that suffers an abnormally high level of shoplifting? And they're often managed in problem-solving plans. And for example, in South Worcester, only on Saturday, one of the most prolific offenders for shoplifting in Tesco's and Asda, one of those people who walks in with a bag into a shop and just clears all the steak out and walks out. He already had a CPN, a civil injunction against him. That didn't stop him, he was straight into the shops, but he had the CPN, and as a result of that, on Saturday he was remanded in custody for shoplifting, which for us is a great result, and it shows that we're putting the focus where it's needed most on the most prolific shoplifters.
Do you have a view on why people who've written in and spoken to us believe that it's increased over the last year particularly? Do you have a theory on and a view on why, particularly in the last few months, it has become such a more well-known and identified issue?
That's a good question, and it's obviously a national issue. It's not just West Mercia, and it is very post-COVID. I imagine stores also having to manage their profit margins very carefully. You think about deterrence in stores, and the cost of store detectives is important. You think about the market for getting rid of second-hand goods, and we know, for example, drug dealers are happy to take stolen goods, whereas perhaps before they were more likely to take money, and a ready second-hand market, if you like, or a stolen goods market, where people will, either in a pub or in a particular area, think that it's a victimless crime if that steak is really cheap or that detergent is really cheap. And so in the absence of a deterrent and the presence of a market, we need to work really hard on what we call being a capable guardian, but that means police officers and the stores working together to show that you can't commit this offence, and that's what we need to work with now.
I'd like us to turn now, if we could, to the issue of perceptions of shoplifting. And from the questions and comments we've received, there's a perception out there that shoplifting is treated as a lesser crime, and national coverage has been describing shoplifting as being decriminalised, which is clearly not the case. John has been clear that crime should not pay, and when shoplifters are caught, they should feel the full extent of the law. But I wondered if you could maybe address, Chief, that view about the seriousness of this as an issue.
Okay, well, if I can answer with 2 points, to say right now and in the future we will take, and we do take shoplifting really seriously in West Mercia Police, but I do not blame the public for having that view. Police often talk about threat, risk and harm, and in the past have had, for many reasons, to often deprioritise shoplifting because of, again, a view that it's not as serious as, for example, a domestic assault that's in progress. And that has led to instances, for example, where shopkeepers have detained a shoplifter and it's taken us too long to get there, or whether, for example, CCTV hasn't been gathered in time and it should have been. So I can really understand the frustration from businesses that are trying to make a living not getting the service that they want. And I think that will have happened in West Mercia Police in the past. And so I sort of understand where that has come from. Having said that, we're committed to fighting shoplifting in all fronts. I'm not talking about a 12-year-old boy stealing sweets. I'm talking about the shoplifting we've discussed so far. And we have an operation called Operation Lagoon, which is our force response to it. This financial year, my DEP has launched a sort of pledge where he's looking to ensure that within an hour, if you have someone arrested, or quicker if there's violence, that you can guarantee you get a response from the police. If you have someone in custody, we will come within an hour. If there is suitable evidence, we'll have a reasonable line of inquiry, we will follow those lines of inquiry and we'll do everything we can to bring the offenders to justice. So it's something we're taking really seriously, and I can understand the frustration, and even some of the examples that we may mention today, I look at those and think we should have dealt with those better.
So we've just been talking about perception. I'm just interested in maybe some myth busting, Alex, around the role that the police might have. I've heard it in both the contributions to this session, but more widely in the community. For example, this view that if it's less than £100 that's being reported, that the police won't follow up, and indeed a couple of the contributors have quoted that £100 figure. Is there a figure out there to which a theft is reported, to which a value has to be over to get a police response?
No, there is no figure. But I know because my daughter works in retail, I know that sometimes shops impose a figure, but certainly there is no figure, and if someone reports a crime, we'll take it seriously. We like to say in policing, think offender, not offence. So if there was a prolific offender and he's stolen £5 worth of groceries, well, next time he's going to steal £200. So we should be getting justice for the shopkeeper even in those instances. Where, of course, we use much more discretion is from low-level offending children in a shop. First-time offence would still respond adequately, but you wouldn't expect, obviously, the full weight of the law to come down on those individuals.
If, as Chief, what would you like to see the biggest thing done to change that perception around shoplifting being seen as the lesser crime?
Well, both for the public and for us as an organisation, we need to realise that it's a serious crime. It's often organised, and if it's not organised, it's prolific offenders causing harm to businesses and shopkeepers in our area, and we should be tackling it. And as we said, with those 20 people we arrested, they weren't just retail criminals. They were committing all sorts of offences in other areas, including domestic violence, stalking and harassment, and criminal damage. So we need to take them seriously. And I think, we, and no doubt people watching this inherently know when they see the type of shoplifter who's going in with a bag, perhaps with metal in it, filling up full of stakes and leaving. These are the people who think they can get away with it, and we need to prevent that happening.
We see shoplifting as one of those crimes that indicates the health of our service to a large extent. It's a bellwether crime. There's nothing ambiguous about shoplifting. clearly against the law. To a certain extent, the offenders who are involved in shoplifting are likely to be involved in other sorts of offending. It is the surface realisation of an underlying criminal market for stolen goods. So in so many levels it's indicative of the nature of crime in West Mercia and the quality of our response to it, that there's in no way would we suggest any value of shoplifting, because it may be indicative of drug misuse or manipulation or simply obtaining property that isn't someone else's is not a lesser crime.
So one of the central bits that we've been talking about is around the level of service that the community get when they report shoplifting, and we've heard clearly from both of you that not a victimless crime, one that's taken seriously, one that is clearly a crime, as in the investigation of it is a little more straightforward than a lot of the issues that are reported to West Mercia Police. And indeed, some of the elements that drive public confidence, I think we have touched on today in terms of how the police respond to visible crimes in our community. Some of the contributors to this session from the public have outlined service failures and others. We haven't had a huge number of people saying we've had a really great response. They are purely anecdotal samples, of course they are. But as Chief, Alex, you must have a wider view around your assessment of West Mercia Police's response to shoplifting and retail crime within West Mercia. At the moment, and I know we talked a little bit about improvements that are happening, but right now, January 2024, what do you think is your assessment of West Mercia Police's response to retail crime?
So we've spoken about already how whenever a call comes in, we assess it for threat and risk. And I'm pleased to say that when people report shoplifting in the most threatening circumstances, often with a shoplifter being violent, that we would grade that as a grade 1, an emergency response, and the median response time for that in December just gone was about 11 minutes. And then we have grade 2, which is it's still serious, we need to get there within 2 hours, and a median response time was 20 minutes in those circumstances. But these are not high volume calls, these are high risk jobs where a store detective has often faced a load of risk and is trying to detain someone who is being violent. The vast majority of shop theft is not reported like that. It is, I've got good CCTV, someone has walked out and they've stolen hundreds of pounds worth of goods, often. Now, as a call taker, you will see that, there's no imminent danger, there's no imminent threat, there's no imminent risk. So they'll have a much lower response from a speediness point of view. It won't be in an hour, it won't be within 2 hours, but it will be logged, and it's slower time. We can look at the CCTV, see if we can understand who the offender is, and then go and make attempts to arrest the offender. You know, I think it's in those circumstances where sometimes we are not as good as we want to be.
Chief police officers are no different to lots of senior professionals running services, but if you're going to give it a number out of 10 at the moment in terms of level of service, if you're going to pick one, and I guess it's not scientific, but where do you think it is on that scale, the current service?
Well, if I can say, as a police officer, 27, 28 years, having worked in multiple forces, and I'm comparing it to other forces that I've worked in, I think we are probably on a 6.
And you talked a little bit already, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more about the improvements that are coming. If we were doing a session in a year's time, what number would you expect the assessment to be in a year's time with the things that are in train and indeed on the horizon?
So I'm always incredibly ambitious around the service that West Mercia Police can provide, and so even next year I won't be satisfied, but I would like to say an 8.
So a big uptick in terms of performance. Some of the issues that we've talked about here don't necessarily come at I think what is described by the police as the higher harm end of what they are. The volume is maybe at a much lower level. One of the contributors to this session from a retailer on most of our high streets, they reported in their facts that in 57% of cases where they detained an offender in the store, West Mercia Police do not arrive to take further action. And I would be amazed if West Mercia could go every time. I absolutely would be amazed. But do you recognise the statistics that they would quote as being likely to be how you would have reported it? And second of all, is that the kind of level of response that you would expect to see with some of the changes that you've got coming?
Well, I just put myself in the shoes of that shopkeeper, and if they had arrested 10s, 20s of people and there'd been a 57% non-attendance rate, I don't think that's satisfactory. If it's 3 or 4 and there's a 50%, 7%, I don't want to talk stats, but I don't think that's satisfactory. Now, if there's lots going on all over the place in West Mercia, we only have a limited amount of police officers we can send. I think, as you insinuated there, sometimes hard decisions have to be made and it has to be communicated well to the shopkeeper. But 50%, 57%, I mean, it's a crime's taken place. To a certain extent, the store have done the right thing, they've detained the individual, and it's our job then to go and arrest and bring that person to justice. So I find that disappointing.
If you were running a store and you were encouraging your store detective or your staff to intervene and detain somebody if it was safe to do so, and only every other one we're going to get a police attendant, do you not think that the motivation to want to do that building the coalition that you were referring to earlier, is quite quickly going to ebb away? And so my question is, how do you maintain the confidence of our retail community if that's what they're currently reporting as West Mercia Police's performance?
So yes, I totally get that. I reflect on my daughter's experience, having regularly seen shoplifters clear out her shop, and I think that if 1 in every 2 prisoners, if they're not arrested, that sends completely the wrong signal. And part of our commitment with Operation Lagoon, which Cooper, as the Deputy Chief Constable, is launching in West Mercia, is a guarantee, as much as is possible in emergency services, but a rebuttable presumption that if you have a prisoner, we will be there within an hour. Clearly, sometimes with our extensive geography and varying demand rates, that's not going to be all the time, but I think that's a good demonstration of our commitment to, when stores have done the right thing, intervene, sometimes at their own risk, and have been brave and courageous and arrested someone, that we respond appropriately.
Could I ask about communication, Alex? Because you said it was really important to communicate with the retailer. We've got one of our contributors has told us about, it works at a filling station, and they said individuals fill up with fuel and happily drive away. The retailer has reported the incidents and supplied CCTV to the police as well, but have heard nothing. I mean, do you think there's more to do? Now, I appreciate that's a one-off incident being reported to you, but do you think there is more that we should be doing in terms of getting back to retailers?
Yeah, well, Mark, as you know, no crime should be filed without the proprietor or the reporter being told. I guess it becomes problematic when there's shifts on, and if, for example, it's a service station and one person is updated that perhaps the person who's reported the crime hasn't been communicated to. But I also accept that sometimes there'll be crimes that have been filed where the proper communication hasn't taken place. We need to be victim codes compliant. Updating the victim is really important. We have a performance framework where we have the data on that, where we understand whether people have been updated or not. And if they haven't, that problem is on us and we've got to fix it.
Some of the balance being in terms of how you use resources that the public have funded, it has to absolutely be in the operational judgment sphere. But how do the public manage some of the perceptions around the different levels of response? And one of the contributors, again from a retailer, a food retailer, say that they logged incidents of shoplifting on 9 occasions, and in their view nothing was done, as in they haven't had any action reported to them. But as soon as there's a fraudulent card being used or a car hit in the car park, the police are out in 1 to 2 days requesting CCTV. And again, they're anecdotes, and we look at some of the stats and we've seen the rises, but how does the perception of the service being delivered improve? And I know we're going to talk about some of the changes shortly, but maintaining the confidence is surely got to be at the centre of some of that work.
I think, I can sit here talking as chief, and I can imagine if that shopkeeper's watching this, they'll be a little frustrated by what I'm saying, and so ultimately it's no point talking, we've got to walk the walk. And they need to be able to see a response, or if there's no response physically at that time, they need to be ensured that they are updated. We take shoplifting seriously. Clearly we take fraud, criminal damage seriously. It's hard to comment on those particular instances, but you have highlighted some of the questions to me beforehand. I've looked at some of the instances and I've thought to myself, I'm not sure that's the service that I want to provide as chief. And we've gone back to some of my senior leaders and asked, can you have a look at some of these instances? Now, we have a number of police officers who work in our command and control centre here, and what they do is they can investigate crimes without having to deploy officers. So when there is no threat or risk or imminent harm, they can look at an instance and say, okay, let's look at the CCTV, let's look at the statements. Is there any reasonable opportunity of us solving this crime? And if there isn't, then the crime is filed and the victim is updated. I think in this instance, the example that you quote is what's happened. Nobody's attended, and then the crimes have been filed. Of course, the shop would have been updated, but perhaps the person who's been reporting it hasn't seen anything, and that's something we need to work on as well. What I would say is those shops who experience the most theft get a good service from us because it's highlighted and prioritised in the weekly management meetings that the area have. What are we going to do with this shop or this offender? But I don't think the shop that you mentioned there has reached that threshold yet.
We're next going to talk about tackling shoplifting, and it's probably really useful, Alex, for you just to flesh out a little more as to what you think the public will see different in terms of police response and partnership work over the next 12 months as they go through 2024 and responding to the significant increases in volumes that we've seen in the shoplifting crime type.
So if you don't catch a shoplifter red-handed, if you like, one of the number one ways is through facial recognition retrospectively from CCTV images. And I'm pleased to say in the last year we've really improved the ability, the digital capability of the organisation, so that when you contact the police, a very simple link is sent over. That can be sent over from a police officer's mobile phone to you as the shopkeeper. You just drag and drop your CCTV in there and it goes onto our evidence management system we call DEMS, and it's just there available to be viewed by a number of officers. It's really good. And we are hoping in the next year to open that up so you don't actually need to contact the police to get the link. You can just send the footage straight off. But Richard has been working on our response to shoplifting and working on what we can do to improve, so I thought I'd hand over to Richard who can just flesh that out a bit.
Okay.
So that point is important. I understand that members of the public appreciate police officer attendance. There'll be many instances where our attendance is necessary and beneficial. As the Chief's alluded to, there are instances where the person's identity isn't known, there's not an immediate arrest we can make. So retrieval of the evidence and the submission of the CCTV is the immediate step, and that can be done in an efficient way that enables us to target some of the offenders without going out to collect that CCTV. And then we will always, in every case, examine that CCTV, establish if an identification has been made, and ensure that it's circulated amongst all officers to enable them to try and identify the offender. In respect of offenders themselves, members of the public may not always see the action that we're taking, would be another point I'd make. So there are numerous instances that we may go into shortly from the last week or so where offenders have been arrested for a shoplifting incident, and we've then researched other crimes that they may have been responsible for, and they've been charged with 5, 6 or more offences. And we will also take opportunities to try and ensure that we limit their future offending, either through the imposition of bail conditions or application for civil orders that prevent their access to certain premises where they've committed offences at. So the public may not always see all of the action that we're taking. It will be offender focused. We will take every opportunity to tackle individuals who are repeatedly stealing from the same stores. But that initial step of securing all available evidence is really important. Investigating, particularly when it comes to shoplifting, is fundamentally preventative. And going back to our previous conversation regarding our attendance when people have been detained by store detectives, we are absolutely committed to attending those instances. The 57% non-attendance figure isn't good enough, because it's only by intervening, getting someone in custody, that we can frequently make links to other offences that they've committed. So a number of steps we're taking, from making it easier for people to submit information to us, CCTV, and then targeting the the offender rather than individual offences that they may be responsible for.
And so just further on that, if you don't mind, Commissioner, the way our call handlers work, as we've mentioned a couple of times already, is about threat, harm and risk. But what we're instituting for the new year is, regardless of that, if you have someone in custody for shop theft, we'll respond within an hour. Obviously, we respond much quicker if that person creates a greater threat. And I had the privilege of just being with C-Team Response in Hereford only a couple of weeks ago, and one officer there, a relatively new officer, had arrested a shoplifter, researched all the crime reports that he was associated to, and was able to charge him with 27 shop thefts. It was a brilliant result, and so that's the work that Rich is talking about, and that needs to happen much more.
Could I ask about timeliness, because we had several comments about evidence not being gathered within a month or not at all. Could you, one of the questions was really well about what's your approach to gathering statements in a sort of an acceptable time frame?
Yes, so whereas we'll respond very quickly if there's the prisoner, clearly an officer under the supervision of their normally sergeant will have a number of crimes they're investigating, as well as often responding to crimes in progress if they're, for example, a response officer. And most of our crimes are held by our response teams who also respond to 999 and 101 calls. And they might have 10, 15, sometimes even 20 crimes that they're investigating, and they will follow a needs basis. Now, if it is a shoplifting and they don't feel there's an imminent risk, or they've had some days off, unfortunately there will be circumstances when it takes some time to collect that evidence. Now, try and do that as expeditiously as possible, but sometimes that can take a long time. Having said that, it's clear from the national strategy and the policy that Rich is bringing in that all reasonable lines of inquiry should be followed. So if there's CCTV or good witness testimony, then it should be taken, and it should be taken in a reasonable time.
Some of our contributors have mentioned that they welcomed seeing the PCSO pop in, a member of their local policing team popping in, and indeed on a daily basis they report and checking on concerns and staff wellbeing and all those kinds of things. We also had some feedback from some of the community around the role that the We Don't Like Crime team would have in terms of crime prevention. We've also had some negatives around a fairly high value theft where it was actually overnight, where burglars stole around a significant amount of cash, but then they didn't get a very good We Don't Like Crime preventative experience afterwards. They get what they describe as a poster to put up, and that's it, as it were. In your view, Alex, how do we get best around preventing shoplifting? The PDM principle about being judged about the absence of crime rather than detecting it. How do we shift away from intervening more effectively when crime has happened to stop it happening again, but also more effectively about stopping it happening in the first place? And what role do you see as the police in doing that, and indeed how do I assist as Commissioner?
Thank you. Well, if I could be vaguely controversial for a while and criticise Robert Peel, our founder of the British Bobby, I do think one of the most preventative things we can do is focus on the prolific offender, bring them to justice, get them remanded in custody, because that stops. You take the offender out, the equation works, there's no offender to commit the offence. Having said that, situational crime prevention, which is making it as difficult as possible to prevent the crime in the first place, is also a very successful technique, and I think that's what Robert Peel probably refers to. And there's,
you can't ask him.
You can't ask him, no, and in fact, I think there's a fair amount of evidence to say he never wrote the PDM principles, but that's by the by. They're really good principles, and I do buy into them. So how do you prevent crime other than getting justice for victims and removing the offender? And there's all sorts of things that can be done. Awareness, how the shop is laid out, physical deterrence. So store detectives are fantastic, and you can see stores doing this. The valuable stuff is behind secure cabinets. Loss prevention is a key requirement for stores. Many stores engage in that. So there's all sorts of things that we can do, the community can do, and the shopkeeper can do. And a combination of all of that, as well as catching the offender, is key. And if we go back to the criminological theory of what you need for an offence to take place, is a motivated offender, a ready market, if you like, a victim and the absence of a capable guardian. If you remove any of those three, you make a difference on the equation. And so the preventative side says, okay, let's make this really difficult to steal. Let's create the deterrent, either with a store detective, a policy of intervention, or police officers and PCSOs regularly patrolling the hotspots and the most important shops as far as shop theft is concerned.
I know you enjoy a good anecdote, Alex, but I recently visited a retail premise who had a high prevalence of shoplifting, which was ironically next door to a police station. They reported to me that they don't see police officers. And in fact, I did the test of, is that weekly, monthly, or whatever. They just said we don't see them. And if a retail premise next to a police station isn't currently seeing them, how do you have some confidence that the changes you're making will mean that actually that is unusual or indeed out of kilter with the experience of the rest of the community across West Mercia?
So this is where our planning for next year, which we've done with you, comes hopefully to fruition. Now, retail premises are clearly spread across our whole geography, both rural and towns. The vast majority of retail outlets are in towns and town centres. And sometimes our neighbourhood officers who operate in those town centres also cover outlying areas, and they're spread across the whole area, when most of the people and most of the harm is based in the town centre. So what we've committed to do with you over the next year is invest in town centre teams. So in town centre teams, in some of our largest towns across West Mercia, those neighbourhood officers would reside, work and patrol only in those town centres. That means they're not pulled off to go to other areas, and they get to know the retailers very well. They understand which shops are most vulnerable, which aren't. They work with them to prevent crime. But also they respond, as you'd expect a neighbourhood officer to, and when someone is in need, they've got someone, perhaps the patrol officer is too far away, I'd expect the neighbourhood officer to go and make the arrest. So I think that's a huge advancement, and I'm hopeful that that will create a positive effect over the next year.
We talked a little bit about retailers and the action they can take, and indeed things like shop watch and those kind of things. One of the contributors asked why West Mercia Police can't take part in initiatives such as DISC, which is a similar system used by akin to shop watch, for those that don't know what it is watching. Other forces use it, and indeed I know it's been used here in West Mercia as well. Is there a force stance around things like DISC, or indeed what the organisation would engage with?
Yeah, so I'm really grateful for that person who wrote into you, because it made me look at DISC, and I looked at this prior to meeting us, and the costing of it is unclear, but it looks really good. Now, we sort of have a version of it using our platform that is called Neighbourhood Matters. But we have a senior officer lead who is responsible for our policy response in relation to shoplifting, and I will send her DISC and see what's in it, because I think it looks really good. When communities mobilise against a crime, it can make a really big difference, and that is what DISC is about. So it's sort of like crowd-enabled, here's the offenders, here's the hotspots, keep a lookout for these individuals with communication with policing. I think it looks very good, so I'm very happy to explore it with our senior policy.
The benefit of being here a while is I know that DISC has operated in West Mercia's geography in my time as Commissioner, and it's how, and I asked a question earlier around what do I need to do to support, and I know we've referred to earlier about some of the officer investments that will be in next year's budget. But how do I also support around supporting to ensure that the community have the right resources, as well as the police, to support community-led initiatives such as whether it be DISC or others? What role would you see me playing?
Well, if we take this for example, I'd like to dive into it more, see what the implications are. I don't know why it failed here previously, or why it just was stopped being used, but it's not just the police that beat crime, it is communities that beat crime. When communities are involved in tackling crime, it's much more effective, I think, and it builds better relationships with policing. Commissioner, I know you have a commissioning budget. I know you are a huge supporter of interventions like smart water, and I'd be very happy to come back to you once we've looked at DISC and see what the implications are, and see if funding can be made available, if indeed that is what's necessary.
We're going to talk about assaults on shop workers, and we've heard a little bit today around retailers absolutely intervening when it's safe to do so, but we also know that we have seen, and indeed I think it is better recognised, the harm that can be caused to those who work in retail. Nationally, we understand that 87% of convenience store staff say that they have been at least verbally abused by thieves. And we get some comment from those who contributed to this session. Indeed, my engagement with retailers is that they do feel at times absolutely under unreasonable and indeed unexpected threat from those who are stealing from their stores. I'd be interested if you just set out the force's position in relation to responding to assaults on shop workers and indeed the force's work in this area.
So I'm with you 100%. To a certain extent, retailers working 24/7, very much like police, offer a brilliant service to the community, often unrecognised. And it came to the fore in COVID, didn't it, where our shopkeepers were classified as COVID heroes, which was really welcome. They should not have to put up with violence, and they should not have to put up with abuse, and we should respond accordingly. And when there is a risk of violence, I'm more satisfied that we respond quicker and more effectively. But there should be no tolerance of it. There should be no tolerance from us. And when we bring the offender to justice, we should be writing up the effect that individual has had on the shopkeeper, and that, whether it's happened second, third, fourth time. And also, and pleased to say, we've many hundreds of civil interventions over the last year, more than the year before. We should be seeking civil interventions that prevent these people going into those stores as repeat offenders, and when they do, of course, we can arrest them and bring them to justice.
One of the contributors was talking about shoplifting and abusive behaviour escalating in Shrewsbury. They say that retail's been told to phone 101 even when crimes are taking place. There are many sole traders in the town, they say, who are generally frightened at times. What advice would you give to those listening today in terms of when there is this type of potential risk of assault or an assault on a shop worker? How should they interact with you as an organisation? Is it via 101 or is there a better route?
No, absolutely. That's 999 every day of the week. If you are at risk of violence from an individual, you ring 999. You'll get a response. 90%, 89, 90% of 999 calls are answered in 10 seconds. Nobody should have to tolerate violence, and if there's a risk of violence, you can.
We'll move on then to talking about feelings around safety in our town centres. And our town centres and city centres across West Mercia are the lifeblood of many local communities. We have had a number of questions submitted about feeling that a lack of police visibility is contributing to that rise in shoplifting. Whilst we recognise that there are a number of plainclothes operations taking place in our centres that the public may not be aware of, there are happy reports and a belief amongst the people who've contributed here that visibility and the lack of it is a contributing factor to the shoplifting issues we're facing. And I wondered what your views were on that.
Well, I do think a lack of visibility, and if we go back to that idea that the absence of a capable guardian, the lack of police officers being around might well contribute to that perception, so we need to do something about it. I don't know, Rich, whether you want to talk about some of our plans in a bit more depth around town centre teams, because that will address where most people are, so therefore where most people experience those perceptions, but also where a lot of the harm is as well.
Thank you. Yes, so we're looking to identify key town centre locations where we will have a dedicated policing presence committed to policing that town centre location, made up of a mixture of police constables and PCSOs. Now, those officers will be on duty working shifts, but they won't be there all of the time. And so I think that's where the point about visibility is important. We want to make it clear to criminals that we are present, that we are looking for them. It's also reassuring for members of the public to see a police presence, and we understand the benefit of that. And so that's why we are going to identify a number of town centre locations who will benefit from a team according to their size and the presence of crime within that location to provide a dedicated, safer neighbourhood response. I'd go further though, because we can only be in so many places at once. We really want those officers, as well as providing a visible presence, to be tackling the offenders who are causing the most harm. So as well as patrolling the town centre, to be actively targeting the individuals responsible for retail crime. And that's our responsibility. We are the ones who need to tackle the offenders, but we do need some help. And we've touched before around violence, around the link to drugs. Much of this crime is linked to the fact that there's a market for stolen goods. It would be unrealistic for the public watching this video to think that all shoplifters are stealing in order to feed themselves and their families. And some of the goods are used in direct payment for drugs, some are used because there's a market. If anyone is able to help us with information as to who is handling those stolen items, as to who is selling them on, then that makes a real contribution to us in terms of being able to target those people and start destroying the market. Because we've spoken extensively about prevention through patrol and trying to tackle the individual offenders. There is an underlying market that sits behind this, and we really appreciate the public offering any information they can regarding who those people are and where we can target them.
And if anybody's listening and watching the video, what's the best way for them to pass on that sort of information? Is it Crime Stoppers? Is it what's the appropriate vehicle to?
Yeah, so people can contact us either by phoning 101 or by emailing West Mercia Police directly, or Crime Stoppers offer the ability to provide anonymous information either by phoning 0800 555 111 or via the Crime Stoppers website, which again allows the submission of anonymous information, and we will take that very seriously.
Some of the perception around town centre safety is linked with the level of crime that people perceive and indeed know to be there. Some of it is also around perceptions. We get some feedback around groups of young people causing either low-level antisocial behaviour or sometimes more serious behaviour, or other, again, often a very small number of people, adults, causing antisocial behaviour. How does West Mercia Police deal with some of the societal issues that also manifest themselves in our retail centres?
So we are interested in prevention. We touched on the importance of prevention. We'll respond to offences in line with the level of threat that's caused. So I would expect an organised shoplifting ring to be dealt with in a different way to some children who are putting each other up to offending. And then when we understand what is motivating people, we will try and put in place with your Assistant Commissioner some steps to provide the best response. So in many cases that will be for the person to be charged and put before the court. That may come after the person's been drug tested on arrest, which allows us to divert them potentially towards drug treatment orders, either with or without a court appearance as well, or where there's the opportunity to intervene at an early stage before someone has become entrenched in this cycle of criminality, to potentially identify if there's an opportunity for some recompense to the shop. So either by way of an apology, a letter, offering to do something in terms of some repairs, we will consider what's the most appropriate circumstance in each case. So in many instances, because of the sort of crime we've talked about, that means going to court, not pass and go. But if there's an opportunity to try and seek some help for the person's underlying reasons for offending, then we'll take it.
And just the point around antisocial behaviour, often connected with retail crime, but sometimes not in town centres. Street drinking, often the street drinking is not associated with the young people. It's different populations, and for that we need to be on the front foot and intervene, work with the local authority as we have done in many areas, like for example Shrewsbury, to take a multi-agency approach to dealing with those issues. And when you have overt antisocial behaviour from young people and from older people, we need to intervene.
You've touched on Shrewsbury as an example. My contention to you would be that the very low level, sometimes the behaviour manifests itself, that Richard referred to in what he just said, often means that it doesn't meet the threshold of intervention. And my example in Shrewsbury would be, we've had a lot of very low-level interventions that only when they're built to the quantum that they have, there has been an intervention. So it's the damage to the town centre in Shrewsbury, whilst that's been allowed to happen maybe over a couple of years post-COVID, before there is now a system intervention. And I would say the same could be had for my experience in Mercia recently. Often perceived to be fairly low-level antisocial activity that has meant in that case, I think, the loss of confidence in a big chunk of the local townsfolk in West Mercia Police. Whilst ironically, I'm also reassured that the West Mercia Police had already begun to try and rebuild that confidence, but it had gone a little too far, and indeed that confidence hadn't been rebuilt fast enough. So how do you reassure me and the wider public that West Mercia has a system in place for that early warning, as Richard just alluded to, of the cumulative impact of those low-level incidences on actually a much greater impact on the health and vibrancy of our town centre?
So we need to respond to antisocial behaviour. We need to get it early, as you've described, to prevent it escalating. That's why people need to report it, and they report it on 101, and when they do, it's useful because we have a record of it and we begin to understand and have a richer picture of what's happening, often in the town centre, sometimes in an estate. And that's where neighbourhood officers excel. They bring together problem-solving plans, working with local authority and other partners to deal with those individuals, and we can have interventions, antisocial behaviour interventions, antisocial behaviour contracts that can grow into full civil interventions if the behaviour isn't nipped in the bud. And some of it is about moving people, sometimes it's about changing the landscape, and sometimes about intervening directly with individuals, and that's what a problem-solving plan does.
We've alluded to the 101 and the call centre a lot today, and it is the way that most people interact with West Mercia Police, the front door of the organisation. I can't imagine that of the reports received, antisocial behaviour is the dominant number, ironically, but it is still a significant proportion, I would imagine, of those low level, where there is unlikely to be a direct response there and then. Do you have any mechanism to understand the quality of service that those people would get when they're reporting the low level type of antisocial behaviour through the call centre? And for example, is there any dip sampling of senior officers of those types of calls to understand the service that the public will be getting?
So I'll ask Richard to talk through our response to ASB in a bit, but as you know, Commissioner, the way we engage with parish councils, which isn't through 101 and 999, also highlights ASB as a top problem alongside theft and road safety and speeding on roads. So we do know that antisocial behaviour is a problem. We can talk about the audit regime, but Rich, I'll just hand over to you first.
So, simple answer is yes. So a cohort of calls for service of all sorts into the contact centre are dip sampled for their quality, including those in relation to antisocial behaviour. And then we also have a post-event sample in terms of satisfaction that members of the public have experienced with the service they have been given. And then in a relatively new initiative, I and in addition with some other officers have started dip sampling crimes and are responsible for them ourselves. So such is my personal commitment to ensuring that we provide a meaningful investigative service around retail crime, that I will examine a couple of crimes each week to check that I'm happy with the level of service we provided. So yes, there is some dip sampling that takes place.
I can't imagine the concern if an officer has got the Deputy Chief Constable overseeing the intervention that they've made in response, but it is great to hear at senior level awareness and understanding of the community and the service that our community receive. Very lastly, I just want to talk about prevention, if we can, just touch on, are there things to which more could be done in relation to how we contribute to tackling some of what are societal issues that play out in our town centres, and is there anything, one that you pick out of area of which we should be focusing on?
Yes, there's lots of tools online that help us try and maximise the preventative effect of our efforts. Clearly, if you're a retailer, you'll be always working out what's cost efficient, whether it's cost efficient to have a store detective or not. But good CCTV is really important. Putting items that are most stealable at the back of the shop elevated in front of the CCTV, sometimes locked away. Putting staff near the front of the shop. These are all good situational interventions that a shopkeeper can engage in. From our point of view, a preventative approach might be the hotspot patrol, lots of engagement, better technology to investigate, and obviously bringing offenders to justice. And the other thing I'd say is a huge thanks to both those retailers, but also to active citizens in the community who often, they come to our award ceremonies, don't they, where they've done a citizen's arrest and they've caught somebody waiting for the police to arrive. These are people who sometimes put their own safety on the line because they want to work for a better West Mercia, a better town that they live in, and I'm truly grateful to those people, and they should be thanked and recognised. I'm not a person who says only leave policing to the professionals. You know, if we as a society come together and take out the second-hand markets, if we do a challenge that is safe and reasonable, and sometimes if we intervene, I think those people should be recognised. They'll certainly be recognised by me.
So Alex, I think it would be really useful for you to set out, as you've described it, that move from the 6 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 over the next 12 months, and the key actions that you and the force will be taking to help make that happen, but also, I suppose, identify some of the action that the public can see and have confidence that the organisation taking seriously a concern that they have.
Thank you. So often in policing it's really helpful to brigade all our action under an operational plan. It sort of cements it in our minds as police officers, and we have Operation Lagoon here, which is our response to retail crime. And as part of Operation Lagoon, we will be speaking with our senior leaders, making sure systems and processes are in place to deliver a better service. Richard has already spoken about the new promise in the new financial year to say any shoplifter arrested, we will respond within an hour at the latest. That is new. The rollout of town centre teams over the next financial year, I think people who use town centres will notice, and hopefully retailers will notice. Some changes in technology as well, where you have the opportunity to proactively share CCTV imagery with us, as well as some performance improvements internally in relation to how we use that CCTV imagery, are all 3 or 4 or 5 things that will contribute to us offering a better service for people who suffer from offending as a result of retail crime.
I'm really grateful for you setting out some of those progressions, and very grateful to yourself and Richard for joining me today to take questions and to explain and highlight and give your analysis around some of the issues affecting our retail community and some of our town centres. I'd also like to thank the public of West Mercia for contributing their questions and concerns that we've hopefully been able to illustrate today. Your voice is incredibly important to ensure that the voice of the public in West Mercia is right at the heart of policing. There's more information around the issues that we've been talking about today, not only on my website and social media channels, but also on the West Mercia Police website and their social media channels. And I'd like to thank those that have been watching today and those that have taken part.